Arthur and Evelyn seemed like two lonely souls given a second chance at love after meeting on Facebook. But what began as a dream cruise across the Caribbean quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Beneath Evelyn's charm lay secrets Arthur never imagined, and within days, their romantic voyage ended not with joy, but with shocking violence at sea. Arthur's house had grown too quiet over the years. After the loss of his wife, silence became his constant companion, filling every corner of the rooms where laughter once lived. At 72, the long evenings stretched endlessly, and he often found himself sitting by the window, staring at the dimming light outside. As he passed the time, he turned to Facebook, scrolling through endless posts, searching for distraction. One evening, while browsing community groups, he stumbled across Evelyn's profile. She was 68, a retired teacher who seemed to live a full and active life. Her page was filled with photographs of flowers, gatherings with friends, and notes about books she was reading. She projected warmth and sophistication, and something about her captured Arthur's attention immediately. Their first exchange was casual, a comment under a shared post, but it quickly grew into private conversations. Evelyn had a way of making Arthur feel seen, her words laced with empathy and charm. Soon they were exchanging daily messages, speaking of their lives, their disappointments, and the ache of loneliness that had followed them into old age. For Arthur, the connection felt genuine and refreshing. Evelyn seemed to understand his world, and he began looking forward to each message as the highlight of his day. Over weeks, the bond deepened. They shared photographs, memories, and even their hopes for the future. Arthur began to imagine possibilities he thought were behind him. Evelyn encouraged these feelings, often speaking about how rare it was to find companionship in later years. Their conversations filled the empty hours, transforming Arthur's evenings into something he eagerly anticipated. He believed fate had given him a second chance, a chance to rebuild happiness after years of solitude. Eventually, Evelyn suggested they meet. Rather than something simple, she proposed an adventure, a cruise through the Caribbean, with music, fine dining, and sunsets over the water. She described it as the perfect way to celebrate their newfound companionship. A grand beginning for two people who had lived enough years to know time was precious. Arthur hesitated at first, unsure if traveling with someone he had never met in person was wise, but her persuasion was gentle and convincing. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and the idea of seeing the world with her stirred excitement he had not felt in decades. His friends expressed doubts, reminded him of caution, of the risks of trusting someone he barely knew, but Arthur dismissed their concerns. To him, Evelyn was different. He trusted the sincerity in her messages, her stories of teaching, her accounts of family dinners, her cultivated interests. He wanted to believe he had finally found someone worthy of his affection. The decision was made quickly. They booked the tickets, arranged their cabins, and planned excursions together. Arthur felt alive again, imagining himself walking arm in arm with Evelyn across the deck. Leaving behind the years of grief and monotony, the thought filled him with hope, sweeping away hesitation. As he packed his bags for the journey, Arthur had no idea that what he believed to be a dream come true was a step into something darker. The cruise that promised joy and companionship would not deliver what he imagined, but instead lead him toward betrayal and tragedy waiting beneath the surface of the sea. The day of the cruise arrived, and Arthur was filled with nervous excitement. The port was bustling with travelers, luggage carts rolling across the pavement, and the massive ship towering above like a floating city. He searched the crowd until he finally spotted Evelyn. She looked almost exactly as she had in her photos, her silver hair pulled neatly back, her smile graceful but reserved. Meeting in person brought a rush of comfort to Arthur, and he felt his decision had been right. As they boarded together, Evelyn clutched his arm with surprising familiarity, guiding him through the noise and chaos of the embarkation lines. Once aboard, Arthur was overwhelmed by the grandeur. Glittering chandeliers hung in the atrium, staff in crisp uniforms hurried to welcome passengers, and the ship's endless hallways promised hidden luxuries. Evelyn moved through it all with ease, as if she belonged to this world. She spoke of previous cruises, her words filled with small details about dining options and the best decks to watch the sunset. Arthur listened intently, grateful for her confidence, allowing himself to believe he had truly found someone worldly and experienced. The first days passed like a dream. They dined at elegant restaurants where live music filled the air. They strolled along the deck beneath the stars, the vast ocean stretching endlessly around them. Arthur felt years younger in Evelyn's company. She was attentive, often leaning in close when he spoke, laughing at his jokes, and assuring him that their meeting was destiny. Yet behind her smiles, there were moments when her eyes clouded, as though she was lost in thought. Arthur noticed, but dismissed it as nothing more than fatigue. By the third evening, Arthur sensed a slight shift. Evelyn began excusing herself often, disappearing into parts of the ship without explanation. When she returned, she would claim to have been exploring or visiting the spa, though she never seemed entirely relaxed. At dinner one night, he noticed her glance repeatedly toward another table, where two younger men sat. They seemed familiar with her, exchanging brief nods when she thought Arthur wasn't looking. He tried not to dwell on it, but unease crept into his mind. The ship's nights grew louder with parties and endless streams of passengers, yet Arthur began feeling isolated. Evelyn was present, but increasingly distracted. One afternoon, while she stepped away from their cabin, he found himself staring at her luggage. The thought of searching through it unsettled him, but the urge gnawed at him. He resisted, telling himself trust was the foundation of their bond, but doubt had already begun to chip away at his confidence. Later, Evelyn suggested they attend a formal event in the ship's ballroom. She insisted Arthur wear his best suit, reminding him that appearances mattered. That night, surrounded by music and laughter, she seemed radiant, but Arthur felt a strange distance between them. She laughed with others, accepted drinks from strangers, and slipped away to dance with a man she claimed was just an acquaintance. Arthur tried to mask his discomfort, but inside questions brewed. As the cruise continued, cracks widened in the image Arthur had built of Evelyn. He could not shake the feeling that she was keeping something from him, that beneath her charm was another life he didn't fully know. Still, he held on to hope, convincing himself that small doubts were nothing compared to the chance of happiness. What Arthur didn't they realized was that the journey he thought would bind them together was slowly steering toward a darker revelation, one that would unravel everything he believed about Evelyn and himself. Arthur awoke one morning to find Evelyn already gone from the cabin. The bed beside him was neatly made, her belongings carefully arranged as if she had planned her absence. He tried not to worry, telling himself she might be at breakfast or walking on the deck, but a cold feeling settled in his chest. Hours passed before she returned, dressed differently than when she had left, her demeanor unusually cheerful, almost forced. She spoke quickly about winning a raffle ticket for a jewelry showcase, a detail that seemed designed to distract him. Arthur smiled politely, but unease grew deeper inside him. That evening, he noticed Evelyn slipping into a small lounge at the far end of the ship. Curious, he followed at a distance. Through the dim light, he saw her seated with the two younger men he had noticed earlier, speaking in low tones. The conversation seemed intense, their expressions serious, until Evelyn spotted Arthur standing in the doorway. Her face hardened for just a moment before she rose gracefully and introduced the men as distant relatives she had unexpectedly run into on the voyage. Arthur forced a smile, though the explanation left him unsettled. The meeting felt rehearsed, as if Evelyn had anticipated this very moment. In the days that followed, her behavior grew increasingly erratic. Sometimes she was affectionate, showering Arthur with attention, holding his hand as they walked across the deck. Other times she was cold and distant, disappearing without explanation, and returning with vague excuses. Arthur's trust wavered. At night, lying awake in the cabin, he replayed every detail of their conversations, every story she had told him about her past, searching for inconsistencies. The more he thought, the more he began to notice gaps, missing details, contradictions, fragments that no longer fit together. The breaking point came during an afternoon excursion on shore. Evelyn convinced Arthur to accompany her into a crowded marketplace, far from the organized tours. She guided him quickly through winding alleys, her grip on his arm unusually firm. When they stopped at a quiet stall, Arthur overheard her speaking rapidly with a vendor in a language he did not understand, handing over something small and shiny from her purse. The vendor passed her a thick envelope, which she tucked away before turning back to Arthur with a bright smile. He asked what had happened, but she brushed it off as a misunderstanding, insisting they hurry back to the ship. From that moment, Arthur could not shake the feeling of betrayal. He began to wonder if Evelyn had ever been truthful at all. Was she really a retired teacher? Had her interest in him been genuine? Or was he simply a pawn in a larger plan he could not yet see? Each question gnawed at him, twisting his stomach with dread. That night, the tension reached its peak. As they returned to their cabin, Arthur finally noticed that the lock on his suitcase had been tampered with. Items were slightly out of place, though nothing appeared to be missing. When he confronted Evelyn, her calm response only deepened his suspicion. She spoke as though nothing unusual had happened, dismissing his concerns with practiced ease. Arthur's mind was no longer at peace. The woman he had trusted, the woman he believed had saved him from loneliness, was becoming a stranger before his eyes. Unbeknownst to Arthur, the walls of deception were closing in, and the cruise that had promised companionship was about to descend into something far more sinister. The calm surface of the voyage concealed a storm that was building, one that would soon explode into violence and shatter the fragile bond they had created. The atmosphere between Arthur and Evelyn had grown heavy with suspicion. What once felt like a romantic journey now carried an edge of unease that Arthur could not escape. He began watching Evelyn more closely, taking note of her movements, her sudden absences, and the way her demeanor shifted depending on who was nearby. He noticed how she lingered at the bar longer than necessary, how she exchanged subtle glances with the two men he had seen her with before, and how her warmth toward him seemed to flicker like a light on the verge of burning out. One evening, while most passengers enjoyed a lively performance in the theater, Arthur stayed behind in the cabin, intended to rest, but instead he found himself staring at Evelyn's suitcase. The memory of her speaking with the vendor and the envelope she had received haunted him. Driven by desperation, he opened the case. Inside, neatly tucked beneath layers of clothing, he found several documents that didn't make sense, multiple identification cards, each with Evelyn's picture but different names, and envelopes filled with cash. His heart pounded as he shuffled through the evidence of a life he hadn't known existed. He realized that the woman who had entered his world so suddenly had brought with her a history built on lies. When Evelyn returned and discovered Arthur with the suitcase open, her expression hardened in an instant. The gentle softness she had always displayed evaporated, replaced by cold fury. She shut the cabin door sharply and demanded to know why he had been prying into her things. Arthur, trembling with both anger and fear, demanded the truth in return. He wanted to know who she really was, why she had deceived him, and what her connection was to the men on the ship. Evelyn's response was sharp, her tone filled with menace rather than explanation. For the first time, Arthur truly saw the danger in her eyes. The confrontation escalated quickly. Arthur, frail from age, felt overwhelmed by the force of Evelyn's presence. She stepped closer, her voice low but threatening, reminding him that no one would believe his accusations without proof. The intimacy of the cabin made the moment suffocating, the air thick with tension as they stood locked in silence. Then, in a burst of rage, Evelyn lashed out. The struggle was sudden and violent. Arthur tried to push her away, but she was stronger and far more determined than he expected. The sounds of their fight were muffled by the cabin's walls, hidden from the laughter and music echoing through the rest of the ship. Arthur's strength faltered under the weight of Evelyn's attack. He fought to free himself, his hands reaching desperately for something to defend against her blows. The suitcase spilled across the floor, papers and clothes scattering like remnants of their broken trust. In the chaos, Arthur realized the truth he had been avoiding. Evelyn was not the woman she had claimed to be, and her reasons for being with him were far darker than companionship. By the time the struggle ended, the cabin was in disarray, and silence settled over the room once again. The fragile hope that had carried Arthur onto the ship was gone, replaced by the grim reality of betrayal and violence. What had begun as a chance at love and redemption had transformed into a nightmare he could not escape. And the walls of the crew's cabin now held a secret that would soon spill into the open. The cabin felt like a tomb after the fight, the air heavy and unmoving. Arthur sat slumped against the wall, his breathing ragged, his body aching from the struggle. Across from him, Evelyn adjusted her clothes with calculated calm, as though violence had never erupted between them. Her expression was blank, stripped of the charm and warmth that once captivated him. In its place was cold indifference, the mask of a woman who no longer needed to pretend. Arthur realized then that she had never come on this cruise for companionship. He had been a target, chosen for reasons he still couldn't fully understand. The following morning, Evelyn acted as though nothing had happened. She attended breakfast alone, smiled at fellow passengers, and joined a group for morning activities. To the outside world, she was composed and pleasant, but Arthur remained locked in their cabin, bruised and broken, both in body and spirit. His mind raced with fear. Should he report her to the ship's staff? Should he try to confront her again? He knew the evidence he had found, the false IDs, the cash, the hidden dealings, might be enough to raise suspicion. But he also knew Evelyn was cunning. If she sensed a threat, she would act swiftly, and Arthur doubted he could withstand another attack. As the day wore on, Evelyn returned with a softness in her voice, bringing him food and pretending to show concern. Yet Arthur noticed how she hovered too close, how her gaze lingered on him like a predator waiting for weakness. He realized she wasn't trying to reconcile. She was watching him, calculating her next move. That night, while the ship rocked gently beneath the stars, Evelyn made her decision. Arthur was drifting in and out of uneasy sleep when he heard the faint sound of movement. His eyes opened to see Evelyn standing over him, her silhouette framed by the faint glow of the cabin light. In her hand was something metallic, glinting faintly. Panic surged through him, and he tried to rise, but his body was slow and his strength diminished. Evelyn moved with precision, her attack swift and merciless. The struggle was brief, muffled by the sound of the ocean pressing against the ship's hull. When silence returned, Arthur lay still, his life extinguished in the very place he had dreamed of finding happiness again. Evelyn wasted no time. She worked quickly to erase signs of what had happened, straightening the room and arranging the scene to look unremarkable. To anyone who might glance inside, it would appear as though Arthur had succumbed to natural causes, perhaps a heart attack brought on by age and exhaustion. Her calm efficiency betrayed experience, as if this was not the first time she had orchestrated such an outcome. The next morning, the crew discovered Arthur's lifeless body. Passengers whispered about the tragedy, expressing sympathy for the frailty of age and the unpredictability of health. Evelyn played her role perfectly, weeping softly, telling staff how Arthur had seemed tired, but insisted he was fine. She spoke of their short but beautiful time together, presenting herself as a grieving companion robbed of love too soon. Few questioned her story. As the ship continued its journey, Evelyn blended seamlessly back into the crowd, her secret buried beneath layers of performance. Arthur's body would be sent home with little suspicion, while Evelyn walked away untouched, ready to disappear into another life under another name. The cruise that promised Arthur a second chance at happiness had instead delivered him into the hands of a woman whose motives remained hidden, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a chilling reminder that even in old age, trust could be fatal.